Welcome back. As promised today, we are diving deeper into the bracket system and the game changers list. I'm Levi.
And I'm Joe.
And this is the Thought Vessel. Welcome to the show. As you might be seeing from intro, we are down one bunny, unfortunately.
A downed Phyrexian has been sent to where Zhalfir is, or at least was.
Or the story, sometimes life happens, but that's okay. Because we're still here, and we are going to be talking about a new bracket system. This is easily going to be the biggest story of 2025 as far as Commander is concerned, I hope.
The year is young, and brackets being brackets are always bracketing.
Brackets be bracketing. But this has been, I think, one of the biggest unofficial rules modifications we've had since the inception of Commander as a format.
And it's technically not even a rules modification, because the whole point is just opening up to a baseline of what a conversation should be. Because at least the previous system, people would just say, my deck's a 7, and that was the running joke. And now we can actually have more defined, what is this deck supposed to be at?
I think it'll really help a lot of new players too. And we're definitely going to dive into it further detail here throughout this show. But I think that we're going to see a lot more interesting games. And I think you're going to have a lot of different decks on the edge that are going to get moved up or down on power level. I know I've done that with a couple of my decks that were kind of in the middle. I had one deck that I'm like, I'm just going to go power this up to move it up a notch. Another one that I decided to scale back a little bit because I wanted to keep in different brackets. And it will be a lot easier when you're going to a convention. You don't have to, okay, here's my power level 1, power level 2, power level 3, power level 4, all the way to 10. Now you can just say, all right, here's my bracket 1, 2, 3, 4. We're done. We're out of here.
Yeah,
I think that's probably going to help.
That's definitely going to help, because with the slew of content from a lot of the creators talking about just the convention space and how you should never really bring more than 6 decks at the most.
So, I say to all of them, don't be a coward. Work the traps.
But not everybody's like you, Levi.
Work them traps. Get it going. But I constantly rotate my decks. If I bring 20 decks to a convention, I'm going to use all 20. I would find a way. Normally, I bring 9 or 10.
I've definitely slimmed those down, because the last convention I went to for Magic, which was Vegas, I used all but maybe 1, and I brought my CDH stuff and 4 decks.
I think it really can depend. It'll be interesting with the brackets, because I think there's going to be a bit more of a range to it. And usually when I make conventions, sometimes if I see a precon I hadn't picked up, I might grab that too, just if I wanted to play like kind of at that bracket level 2 power. Or it used to be kind of lower power now, which is interesting. That something else we'll get into as well is that I think the conversation has shifted to it too, of where your average precon is being evaluated. Well, let's go ahead and just jump into an Am I the Archenemy? It wouldn't be a Thought Vessel show without either an Archenemy or a draft. Let's hop in.
And this one, definitely is on theme for what we're talking about today. Am I the Archenemy? The other night, I was playing EDH with a few friends and my brother, and things got a little heated. I was playing my Tentacle deck, which has the Watcher in the Water as commander. Basically, I cast the Kraken, play a bunch of instants on my opponent's turn, make a ton of Tentacle tokens, and then sacrifice them in such a way that my opponents can't untap their blockers, and I swing with as many Krakens as I can. The game was well underway, and I cast Jin-Gitaxi's Progress Tyrant, which made everyone pretty visibly unhappy. And truthfully, understandable. It's a bitch of a card.
Real quick here, just for those that you don't know, in the typical Praetor fashion, it will double up something you're doing and put a stacks effect on what the same thing, but for your opponent. So in this situation, Progress Tyrant will double up the first instant sorcery or artifact you cast, and for your opponents, it's countered. We'll get back to that card in particular later on in this podcast, but that's what's on the field right now.
Went 2 full rotations without them being able to do anything about it. Then I cast Nexus of Fate, which was doubled due to Jin-Gitaxis. Hey, this is feeling pretty familiar. Is this me? Did I write this post?
Did you do Tentacle thing?
No, but I did do some Jin-Gitaxis doubling up the extra turn spells things. I cranked out a bunch of Krakens, swung them evenly between everyone, and on my final turn, cast Beacon of Tomorrows. Everyone just grumbled and scooped since they knew I had more than enough resources to finish the job. I tucked the deck away after that and played other stuff because everyone was so grumpy. They made comments all night about it, some jokingly, some not. I was accused of bringing a deck that was way too high level to the table. I feel like I was just playing the game as it was intended with the game pieces available, but everyone acted like I had committed some atrocity. Too long, didn't read. Am I a jerk for doubling 2 additional turn cards and killing all 3 opponents at the table? Yes.
Definitively, it is kind of tough because I feel for my brothers in the groups of the blue and the white because a lot of what makes those colors very, very strong does get condemned. But one thing you need to understand is, dear original poster here, when you are casting an extra spell turn, you are starting to monopolize the game and the time equity all for yourself. Most people will get minorly annoyed by one extra turn spell. But whenever you start doing multiple, so in that situation, you took 4 extra turns in a row because you copied the Nexus and they copied the Tomorrows. If you're taking an average of, let's just say, 5 minutes per turn, because you've got a lot of those little extra triggers in combat to calculate and things like that. So 5 is a pretty conservative number. You've taken an extra 20 minutes consecutively where everyone's just waiting around to see if you could possibly end it. That's not necessarily the most fun thing for everyone else to be dealing with while you're doing your calculations. It definitely makes kind of a boring situation for your opponents. Not a lot of excitement's happening. One thing to keep in mind is this was made prior to the bracket rules, but if you look at the brackets now, chaining extra turns, which in this context, 4 turns in a row, I would absolutely call that chaining. That isn't even allowed until bracket 4, which is optimized, a step below CEDH. We were doing optimized 4 things in a 2, maybe 3 bracket pod would be my guess.
Truthfully, we don't know what the other people were playing, and we don't know their deck's consistency. He could have just gotten lucky and done what his deck usually does. The other decks just didn't. We are only really getting the side of the story of he did what his deck wanted to do, and the other people, they probably just didn't and got grumpy about it. But if the case is that his deck was way too strong outside of what other people could do, especially since he was taking advantage of making all of the tentacle tokens to tap down his opponent's creatures, that can be seen as a little bit more stacksy and not as fun when it comes to the extra turns at that point than it is not just monopolizing the game because of extra turns, monopolizing the game for restricting actions that your opponents could do.
When you look at the game changer list too, expropriate's on there as an extra turn spell, multiple counter spells that are stopping your opponents from doing things. We have stacks pieces. You were using all of these things. Granted, I like doing a lot of these things. I'm a big blue-white Azorius advocate. Everyone knows this, but not every pod's going to be down with the sickness here. So it just kind of depends on what you're trying to do. You probably either need to find a group that's going to be more suitable for that particular deck, or just possibly a different play group. Just put something else in. Maybe it's a little bit more typal strategy or just kind of more grindy attacking, because it seems like they're doing more of 2-3 things just from the way they reacted to the particular interaction, would be my guess.
And while I started off saying that, yes, you are the jerk, you're my kind of jerk, because this is exactly what I've done to Levi, and that is in fact why he swung Alexios at me to win a game. It was the retribution after taking somebody else's Jin-Gitaxias.
Did I win that game? Because I definitely...
You did. You absolutely won that game.
It wasn't my Alexios, and it was not the tactical thing to do. It was like, well, payback time.
You still won that game. It wasn't even, there will be some place, somewhere, and I will throw the game away just to kill you. And then you didn't even do that. You still won.
We had another player in the game using the bunnies. They were also very, very scary. I probably should have taken that person out, but figured it out.
Yeah. This is why the bracket system was one of the biggest things that they wanted to come together to talk about, because the Rule Zero conversation was not really working, and not working in a way that was beneficial to everyone. Because the post that we were reading, that's a year ago. The bracket system wasn't a twinkle in the eye currently. But with the bracket system now, they could probably have found a little bit better and said, well, this seems to coincide. Even with a game that I had last night, the deck that I just recently built, which was Hashaton, Moxfield, that resource has been really nice, said that that deck was a 2. Levi, how many Moonshaker calories did I said that I made in that game?
You said you made like 100 or something?
I made a good 500 Moonshaker calories with 1,020 cats because of the combination of Ohirtak, Ocelot Pride, and the Moonshaker cavalries, all using Hashitan's ability. And when you have 4 Ocelot Prides, because the Sun Titan got the normal one back from a graveyard, you're just gonna have a whole ton of things to just mow people down.
We're definitely having a lot of power here. When I look at that kind of a play, I don't know how many precons could do something on that level. The most powerful thing is I think we got one precon recently that let you do an infinite combat combination.
Yeah, and I want to say that was like the Fallout ones.
I think it might have been the Modern Horizons energy one where you can make a copy.
No,
But
that's it.
the exerted attacker, so you could just perpetually throw a 3-1 at somebody over and over again.
Yeah, because you don't actually need to pay the energy to do that. You can just continue to do it.
Definitely a weird thing with that particular deck, but like that's probably the strongest thing I've seen a precon do. Most of the time, it's just kind of we're gonna make a big board of stuff and go wide and try to figure it out. Somebody for like 40, maybe. But yeah, before we move on here, I think we both agree that this person was kind of the jerk in that context.
A jerk after my own heart is how I would put it.
Fair enough. I think just you need to be wary of the fact that 2s and 3s do not like chaining extra turns together. So just be cautious of that strategy in the future. Gas that deck up a little bit, get it stronger to compete with the 4s, if that's what you want to do. We'll go over some decks that we tweaked and modified a little bit on the show here to kind of work with the brackets a little bit more as we're going here. I think at this point, it's time to get that deck a little bit stronger, get that into a better pod.
For the most part, a lot of this could have just been solved if they just talked, and at least the brackets are allowing for a easier time to talk.
Kind of start our conversation with the brackets here. We went over this last time. I'll very quickly run through it. So we have 1 through 5. 1 is the least powerful. 5 is the most powerful. 1 is your ultra casual commander deck. So these are the decks that are lower power than a precon. No MLD or mass lands or extra turns at all. No 2-card infinite combos. No game changers at all. And running very, very few tutors. One thing to keep in mind, land tutors are not considered tutors for that particular context, as we've learned with the conversation. Number 2, we've got the core, which is average current pre-constructed deck. So this is kind of where your precons go. Again, no less land denial, no chaining extra turns. So you could have an extra turn spell in there, maybe 2 if you're lucky. No 2-card infinites, no game changers, few tutors again. Number 3, you get to upgraded, which is going to be updated precons, kind of where your average commander deck is going to lie, which is no mass land denial, no chaining extra turns, and late game 2-card infinite combos allowed. And then 3 game changers. And then 4 was optimized, no holds barred, but you're not really factoring in CDH meta, meaning the Blink deck's going to do the Blink thing. The Voltron deck's going to do the Voltron thing. We're not just making a pile of good cards trying to get a combo to go off. And CDH is we're trying to win a structured Magic the Gathering tournament event. My deck is going to cost a good, sensible down payment on a card.
And also focused specifically on what your opponents are going to be playing. You're not going to be playing just things that are ubiquitously good. You're going to be playing alongside those cards that are very specific and very niche. Your Chain of Vapors, your
Sky Turtle, be one.
Sky Turtle, you're not really going to see that in decks really outside of CDH. Maybe the occasional one, which is like, well, I have discard outlet, or I just like the good creatures. That one is very specific. Touch the Sky Realm is another one that you usually only really see in CDH and not really in any other point in Commander. Maybe an Enchantress deck, but very seldom.
And you'll get some like weirder niche mana rocks like Jeweled Amulet, where you're probably not going to see that in a casual deck for the most part, unless like you really need your commander out on turn 3 or something, just because it's just so far down the list as far as mana rocks. But if you're already running Chrome Mox, Mox Diamond, Soul Ring, eventually you're going to get to that point.
Plus, with that one specifically, in CDH, you usually have some kind of spare mana, and that's what it's there for, is to filter it in to have a more explosive turn next time. And especially if you, and I don't know about any proliferation strategies in CDH, but if you can proliferate it, then it's just a perpetual mana rock all on its own anyway.
Very good point. Maybe at some point we would get that. I think you would have to have a massive level of bans before like Atraxa Infect start making its way into the fold.
I think it would have to be a specific piece that can just incidentally proliferate, and something that you would be able to really gain some value off of the proliferation. I'm not really going to see Atraxa proliferate too soon. You would have to have something that would say, for however many counters, draw the card that's not the One Ring, because the downside, it will kill you much faster.
Get it going or get got. Kind of a
Yeah.
card right there. With that, I think a couple things that we kind of wanted to point at or take a look at in a little bit farther detail. Just kind of seeing here is one thing that we got with this one is we got the general description on things that like we at certain power levels we probably shouldn't be seeing, or power brackets we probably shouldn't be seeing. No mass land denial or extra turn. Jacobi's the last land denial deck, that is now automatically a 4. Yeah, he's going to have to decide whether he wants to try to upgrade it or kind of rule zero it down to a lower level, because MLD is only allowed at the level of 4. No 2-card infinite combos, putting restrictions on the game changers, and also the extra turn chaining kind of things as well.
They basically laid out a lot of the things that make decks strong and what specific archetypes those strong decks tend to go towards. Mass land destruction or land denial, to make sure that you had built yourself up while your opponents hadn't. Chaining extra turns, because if you keep monopolizing the time, you are eventually going to win. The 2-card combos and tutors to make your deck a little bit more consistent, or combo win right there on the spot.
What's interesting to me, and this was brought to my attention in a little bit of capacity, is I've seen 2 deck lists online that are really intriguing, because neither one of them were designed to be serious. Like both of them were just created to prove a point. The first one was a power level 1 Sisay CDH deck. It was a Sisay, we're using Nico Bolas and Aminatou with both the Teferi to infinitely flicker, and then you bring in Mount Doom or whatever to start damaging everybody out. Very strong, very consistent deck, but they took out like the quick mana rocks and some of the removal and things that would have made it at a higher power bracket because of the game changers. And it was down to a power level 1, which it is very much not.
I would actually argue that's not a power level 1. I would actually argue that is still a 3, because the whole point is that they have a late stage combo with Sisay and Mount Doom. That's still a 3.
How they got around it is because Aminatou, Nico Bolas, and Oath of Teferi is a 3-card combo.
Splitting hairs.
So semantic aside, it technically got put in as a bracket 1 for Moxfield. And that was the point that he was trying to make by putting that list together. If you are looking to optimize your way out of the game, you're going to be able to do that regardless. And the second list was literally just a Selesnya food-making hobbit, 98 forests, and 1 Armageddon. It was a bracket 4 because it has a mass land destruction card.
I remember seeing that on Rachel Week's post, and how she immediately called that guy out as a bad actor. And truthfully, if the person who made the Sisay deck, it's technically a 1, that's also arguing in bad faith, because you just made a CDH deck, and if you don't say, yeah, this is a 1 that I tried to build within the system as a CDH deck,
well, in his defense, he did say in the description, look, this is a CDH level deck. This is not intended to be power level 1. He built the deck to just prove the point. He's not putting it together. He's not playing it. This is something that happens. Can happen. So it is a bit of an Achilles heel right now, where I think there's ways you can look at the system and kind of work your way around it to try to get to a certain bracket that you're wanting to do. When you're moving forward and playing these games, if you start blowing people out consistently, like at the power level 2, you may need to move that deck up into a 3. Can be rough depending on the caliber of the 3s around you. Maybe you might want to look to pick up a game changer or 2 just to kind of up the power of your deck a little bit to kind of compensate. But it'll be very interesting to kind of see how blended or serious and finite the lines between these brackets become. Because when we were 1 through 10, a 6 and a 7, they can play together very, very easily. It's not that big of a deal. If 5 and an 8, you could see a bit more of a drastic turnaround between the 2.
Like they said, they're not married to any specific number of brackets, and they'll adjust that as that goes. That's why this is a beta. That's why when people were talking about it, and there are 2 different kinds of people who want to try and break the system. The ones like the guy who built the Sisay deck that you just said he was not going to build it, he just wanted to prove a point. That's the kind of people that they actually want working on trying to break this system, because then it tells them, what can we do to make it better? Versus the other person who just made the 98 lands in Armageddon and the commander, and you're just trying to make a joke and not actually adding any kind of constructive criticism. We were given the system to test, to try and
Yeah,
get
it's
it better.
it's some memes. But before we get into the game changer list, which I think is a lot of the meat and potatoes of where a lot of these discussions come from, what would you change if you had the ability to? Gavin just handed you the keys to the car here. As far as the categories, would you take anything away? Would you clarify anything more? Would you add anything?
I think the best thing to do is that I think that twos should at least get access maybe to one, maybe two game changers, because then that leaves wizards to feel free to reprint stronger cards into a deck that doesn't necessarily immediately combo or make it any stronger than any other precon. And it allows new players to have access to cards that are a little bit on the stronger scale, whether those might be a Thassa's Oracle or not. That would necessitate going into threes and increasing the game changers for that, probably to 5 game changers. Because 5 game changers, I don't think that's gonna be too warping, especially if everybody's pretty much on the same page and if you're already doing a lot of synergistic stuff. Heuristic Study's not gonna work that well against a Hashaton because I'm not casting these spells. I'm discarding them and making tokens with an ability. It's all about where the lines meet for everybody. 4s and 5s, I think, are at the way, because I'm pretty sure intent is actually a pretty decent delineation. I am trying to win in a meta context as a 5 versus I put a ton of powerful cards in this, but I don't think I could win a tournament with it. Is definitely a decent delineation.
Whenever I play, I don't like CEDH as much, just in general. I prefer more power level 4 just because if I'm building a legendary typo deck, I want to have a little bit more autonomy of what I can do and have it still be considered valid. Where CEDH is a lot more rigid just on the nature of what we're doing. You can't add a bunch of fancy seats and aesthetics to a NASCAR stock car. If everything's standardized, everything is exactly what it needs to do to go as fast as possible around the turn. That's just kind of the way it has been. So I have a more of a preference towards optimized or upgraded. That's kind of where I hang out. Core, for me, I have a lot of precons that I enjoy. So if I wanted to play more like a power level 2, I'm probably just going to pull a precon out of my box and play with one of those, just because I enjoy precon battles. I do have 1 or 2 CDH decks just together. I'm a big Magda player, as some of you probably know at this point. And then for me, I don't get a lot of excitement out of ones personally. As far as the categories are concerned, I think they needed to make it more of a defined number on the tutors that we have, because we've put tutors on the game changer list. I think that making a definitive number, exhibition, you get 1 tutor. Core, you get 3. Upgrade, you get up to 5. And then optimize, you can do whatever you want.
So funny enough, if you actually go into the Mox field and hover over the deck, if you look at bracket 2, they actually say you get up to 3 tutors for 2. Ones, I don't know if they're allowing any kind of tutors. They might allow 1. But at least for bracket 2 on Moxfield, they defined it as up to 3 tutors.
That's Moxfield's coding, and that's what they're trying to do. But for as far as like official commander beta, we still have few tutors. So we don't have like a definitive number, where I think if we specified that a bit more, that might help things. Because that's the only thing that in chaining extra turn spells, like those are a bit more very vague terms at the end of the day.
Well, chaining extra turns just without spells, just chaining extra turns. That just means you keep taking a turn after a turn after a turn after a turn, and pretty much like, doing what our jerk in the beginning did.
At 2, chaining extra turn spells, but like time stretch. 10 mana, you get 2 turns. That's done. You're not copying, you're not looping it. It's 1 spell.
And that I wouldn't say is chaining, because you're spending 10 mana time warp all on 1 spell.
It is very big, very expensive spell, but we might say it's not chaining. Somebody might say, well, you've chained 3 turns together on the turn you cast it and 2 extra. The fact that we're having this as an argument kind of brings up that debate in my mind. And then finally, I think that we have done a lot as far as hating out different strategies and resources. So I think maybe something on the lines of putting a cap maybe on counter spells or stacks pieces on like kind of power level 1, perhaps like as far as the interaction's concerned. Might be something that I would be considered to explore. And I think you could probably allow for 1 mass land denial in 3. You could probably do like an Armageddon.
I can see that. As long as it's 1, I can definitely see that, because that is where it's getting a little bit stronger, especially since they're also saying, hey, 2-card infinites are fine in 3. So maybe they could have a little mass land destruction as a treat.
I think we should start normalizing attacking different resources for mana. I could have a player who has got an affinity deck running a bunch of mana dorks and stuff like that, and then I take them out of the game entirely with a Vandal Blast and no one bats an eye. Landfall deck that they can kind of bully people into letting them do what they want because it's taboo to go after the land. So I think that giving players an extra resource to possibly deal with things that they're having problems with is going to be helpful. Moving on here to kind of the next idea here for the game changer list, because they've talked about possibly unbanning some cards and banning some cards. And we'll get into some specifics with this in a second. But we currently have 40. In a perfect world, what is the number of cards do you think is reasonable to put on a game changer list?
Truthfully, the number should ebb and flow with just 1, the cards that WotC will continue to produce, and 2, where those cards are going to be used. Truthfully, there was a whole bunch of people that said that there should be some cards that should be on the list. And even with something that we'll talk about later, there's not too many that should come off that list, even though maybe there can be 1 or 2.
There's a couple in here. I don't think they would come off the list, but I feel like you can make an argument for it. We can definitely talk about those. I think that if you get beyond like 60 cards, I think you've got a bit of a problem. The more you add, I think the more game changer slots you need to give players as well, because you're going to get to a point where functionally that it's going to be harder to build a stronger level of 3 if you've got 120 cards on the game changer list that you can't pick from. It becomes a bit more of a chore to go through like, oh, I'm going to add this card to the deck. Okay, how many game changers do I currently have in the deck and stuff like that? So trying to cap it around 60. And then if you start getting too big, maybe look at banning or unbanning or just removing stuff that, oh, it turns out it wasn't as big of a problem as we thought it was.
At the same time, I can actually see that being okay to expand it a little bit larger, because it forces players to think more about what they're doing with their decks. Because if you are, say, trying to stay within that bracket and you just keep adding and adding more game changers without actually thinking about it, you're going to look at what you're doing and say, okay, I need to step back a bit and I need to still work within what I'm trying to do. And the addition of certain cards on that list will help that. Now, I think that there should be like some tier system, and we might do that in a future episode of what's like the worst on the game changers list and most likely to get banned versus this is on here because it is technically really strong, but not necessarily ban worthy.
Let us know in the comments below whether you're on Spotify or YouTube if you would like to see that kind of an episode or what kind of episodes you'd like to see in the future, because we like hearing from you.
Please comment. We love them so much.
But looking at the list here and everything else as far as the brackets are concerned, we kind of see different categories of game changers. I can kind of feel what the meeting was looking like. The cards that are on this list, because there are certain cards that people were requesting to be added to the list that I don't think match the kind of general philosophies from what I'm seeing here, is you have absolute CDH staples. They're in a league of their own. This is going to generate so much value that I'm going to bury everybody if they can't answer it. Be hyper efficient at what they do. So this is going to be your Fierce Guardianship.
The One Ring.
Yeah, Fierce Guardianship, Bolas's Citadel, Demonic Tutor. They're the best in class kind of stuff. And then you have your unfun category. So your Drannith Magistrate, your Smothering Tithe, your Expropriate, kind of the stuff where it's making it harder for people to do things or even take turns. And then we did have some legendary creatures on the list. I personally believe that we had a handful of legendary creatures, and we had a couple of creatures that were legendary that aren't necessarily the commander that were causing the issue for like Jin Gataxia's Core Augur. I don't know when the last time I saw somebody put that 10 mana creature in the zone. Like it's usually somewhere in the 99. And same thing with Vorniclai's Force of Hunger. These are very good cards, but I don't think it's a command zone issue as much as a in the 99 issue.
And that's kind of where it's at that point. And that's why some of the announcements for the unbans I can see that some of the legendary creatures on the ban list coming off. And truthfully, with all of the different things that they have in the game changer list, the philosophy is actually what the commander board originally was doing with the ban list, because a lot of the cards on the ban list were signpost bans. And basically, we're seeing a lot of the game changers that are just kind of fulfilling that legacy of being signpost, but still playable.
One thing I will say is having this quote unquote soft ban, I think will make it harder for cards to get banned out of nowhere. As we know, this is the watch list, and it's a way for them to put some minor restrictions on cards. For example, I don't think they would do this in April, but I think in the future we could possibly see a Dockside coming back just because it's not going to be in 2s and 1s. If it's in an upgraded 3 category, there's a lot of creature decks only in there where you may not be producing that much. And then if you're aggressively trying to use it, then an early 2-card infinite combo would put you into a 4 by default. I think that is a card that we could have a conversation or bring it back at some point, because there are games in which Dockside does nothing. You play it and you get your two treasures back. It's an absolute bomb in CDH. And we've even seen the meta shift in being more artifact heavy because there is no longer a Dockside they have to worry about anymore. That's just kind of the way it's become.
And those decks that were reliant on Dockside would come back.
Some of them have adapted decently well. Sisay, Weatherlight Captain, which was one of my favorites, still definitely struggling. They've got some new tricks up their sleeves, but Dockside getting banned really, really hurt their validity as far as an actual playable tournament deck is concerned. And then you're seeing other decks like Magda starting to do better because you can hoard up treasure tokens a little bit easier because you don't have to worry about someone flipping in a Dockside and just winning off of you existing. We can definitely talk about the bracket here as far as when we look at the numbers for the bracket system and the game changers. We had 5 cards in white, 9 cards in blue, 7 cards in black, but you only had 2 reds and 3 greens. The color disparity, it's very interesting to me. I don't think that it's unjustified. I'm just very intrigued.
Be intrigued no longer. We have in fact found out that red and green are the worst in CDH. We did it, folks. We found the answers.
Obviously, you'd have a couple cards that absolutely would go on this list. Like if Dockside came back, definitely going to be a red game changer. Do you think it has to do with just the play styles of the colors, or what do you think is causing just such the difference?
Truthfully, it's one, the play styles, and 2, while red has very strong cards in more casual settings where not everybody is going as fast as possible, red's signature thing, it doesn't have a lot of that within the CDH metagame or even within the power bracket of 4. It's struggling. The same thing happens with green. Green is a casual powerhouse, and everybody understands that when they are at pre-con level playing against somebody who just built their first mono green deck. That deck is a house in casual. When you get farther up, it takes a little bit more for green to really hang. That's why when you have Selvala or Yisan, those are very typical combo decks where Selvala is trying to get as many green mana as possible and keep pumping out big creatures, and Yisan is just, I'm going to keep untapping Yisan, get the chain going.
I've got a quick story for you. One of the first decks I put together was a Yisan Wandering Bard deck, and the whole philosophy was race to 8. Get enough just random green stuff on the field and then hit a Crater Hoof and win off combat damage. In casual environments, it did decently well. Definitely was built as a glass cannon. This could absolutely get stopped. Wasn't a ton of tutors just kind of doing its own thing. One game in particular, I was playing against some deck that had blue. And I remember tutoring up and getting the Crater Hoof and then just getting psych rifted immediately and just completely shut down. So many of my mana dorks that went back to hand, total blowout. And that's just the perfect example of the way it is. If you're a color that is strongly relying on combat, the higher up in power level you go, the more answers that people are going to have. I've compared green and red being kind of the colors of aggro. I've compared having an aggro deck in Commander similar to using an opening trap in chess. At lower levels, very scary. At higher levels, you're just putting yourself at a disadvantage. Because the longer the game goes, the worse it's going to be for you.
And that's typically where red and green shine, is the early game.
Do you think it's just a power level type situation where it's just because these cards are built more on the higher power level. It's just there's not enough cards right now that are going into that zone.
I'm pretty sure it's just because a lot of it is they're just not as strong as literally everything else on the list. That being said, we probably could find a few more examples. These were the ones that were just really standout examples.
Would you like to start or shall I?
I shall start off with Levi and I talked about this and talked about what we would do with the Game Changers list, and we came down with 4 questions. What would come off the Game Changers list? What would we put from the ban list onto the Game Changers list, effectively unbanning it? What do we think should be put onto the Game Changers list that is not currently on there or banned? And what is something that we have heard that other people think should go on that we believe shouldn't go on at all? And the first one that I think should come off is Trinisphere. I think that Trinisphere in more casual pods is not as devastating as we might think it is. Unless you are piloting specifically a 1 and 2 mana value deck, you're likely not even going to get affected by Trinisphere.
Let's talk about this one a little bit. All right, let's just say that I'm playing a lower power deck, 4 mana commander, creature typal deck, just kind of your very average commander deck kind of a thing. It might make my rampant growth cost 1 extra at some point. Maybe I've got to pay 3 for Swords of Plowshares, which you're getting to like Beast Within value. That's not that big of a deal, especially at the levels where you get to a point like 9 or 10 where you have like 4 or 5 mana left over each turn. I don't think it's going to be as big of a problem. And then at the higher levels where you're going to be doing more damage with the card, it's totally fine. How many 1 and 2 decks would you consider running Trinisphere in?
Probably not a lot because it's taking away from a lot of the things that I probably would want to be doing around that level. Unless I had like some specific synergies with artifacts, not really.
Maybe if I had some artifact synergies or I'm playing a big mana value commander anyways where nothing is under 3 for me and I just want to slow people down. For the most part, I don't see this getting played in lower levels anyways. Like, I'm not sure how many like newer players that are playing around 1s and 2s are even looking at Trinisphere to pick up because it's not asymmetrical. Like, it hits everybody.
Plus, just going back to the fact of unless you are building a deck that is pretty much only 1 mana or 2 mana value, Trinisphere is likely not even going to affect your game at all, especially in 1s and 2s, because you're likely going to have bigger spells in the first place. Spells that are either at where you would need to spend to not even be affected by Trinisphere or beyond.
Mine would be, looking at the list here, of the cards that I think would probably be removed, I'm actually going to go back to Jin-Gitaxias. It puts you on top deck. You can reanimate it and do things like that. But most of the times, to get it out, you're going to be doing very, very powerful things anyways that are probably going to bump you up by default. So it seems silly to have it on there. And then also, in my opinion, at a more casual level, I think that the newer Jin-Gitaxias does more damage in those events where it's countering and doubling the instant sorceries and artifact than it would be just the draw 7, discard 7.
My argument to assist that is that some of the cards that are currently on the Game Changer list, I think should only be taken off if other parts that make them that strong get put on. Because my backup for comes off was using that same argument, Thassa's Oracle.
In the right deck, Thassa's Oracle is just like a super scry. We do not have Demonic Consultation on the list. And it's kind of a weird thing because when you look at the entirety of the Game Changer list, like one thing that has been consistently omitted, unless you're being kind of facetious, is finishers. Craterhoof is not on the Game Changer list. Labman or the Labman Jace are not on the Game Changer list. Neither is Approach the Second Sun. Thassa's Oracle is on the Game Changer list because it's a very good finisher, but none of the other ways to support it. But if I'm doing a Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation, wouldn't that be considered a 2-card combo?
It is.
And that's already on the list as one of the exclusions.
But the issue is that's not a late game 2-card combo. You can actually get that combo done as early as turn 3 if you are not being aggressive. Because as long as you have 3 mana to do Thassa's Oracle and Demonic Consultation, you are going to get there. And at lower levels, people aren't going to have the resources to really deal with that.
At that point, late game 2-card combo, So at that point, you're doing Thoracle stuff in 4, which is where the game changer list would have been anyways. Thoracle being on the list is kind of like putting a hat on a hat, in my opinion.
If I could skip over the put on from the ban list to my point for what should be put on, I actually thought that in combination, if we put Demonic Consultation or / Tainted Pack onto the game changer list, Thassa's could come off, because then you could try and be a little bit more cheeky with how you win with Thassa's. Whether that be with like a leveler to exile your library.
You have Azami Lady of Scrolls is the wizard deck where you can get Thassa's Oracle down and your devotion to blue is like 20. You're not exiling your whole graveyard. You're just digging that deep. So there are some interesting ways you can win with Thoracle. Because that deck is all about trying to draw it down to it.
Plus, Demonic Consultation and Tainted Pack can also assist you with a different combo that when I was doing my research, it can do it outside of just doing Thassa's Oracle. But I want to hear what your pick was before I say it, because what I'm talking about was my backup pick.
Are we talking about something from the ban list coming on, or
what should be going on to the Game Changers list that is currently not on and is not being unbanned?
One thing that I think should be on, it's not as high-powered as Oracle or anything like that, but it kind of goes in the category of absolute value town engine that is going to take the game over if no one stops it. The Great Henge. You get green their 4th card. It's card draw and ramp and life gain all on the same artifact. It's very easy to get that cost down to where it's just 2 mana to play. It can come out early. It's going to keep your hand refilled. It makes green just an absolute powerhouse to deal with, especially if you can clone it. It just gets out of hand so fast. And it is a fantastic card. I think I was a little surprised to see it not go on there. I think that in April, I would be surprised if it doesn't get added, to be honest.
I disagree. I can definitely see where you're coming from, but I actually, with my backup pick, it was a actually pretty decent 4th option for green. And we in fact see it in CDH quite often. Food Chain.
I think it is covered a little bit by the 2-card combo.
That's actually the card I was talking about with Demonic Consultation Tainted Pack, because you can say Food Chain with Demonic Consultation, exile a good portion of your library to then get it into your hand, and you will likely hit the Mist Hologryphon, the Eternal Scourge, or Squee if you're in a teamer deck.
Well, you'd have to be Sans White to have Demonic Consultation plus the teamer package.
The point of it is that you have this 1-drop tutor that gets the food chain to your hand and can also exile a piece that you need to have the food chain work. That's why I think that Demonic Consultation Tainted Pact is above, but then food chain's also right there.
Always depends on intent, but I feel like there isn't anyone out there that's using food chain in a non-malicious way.
That's why I think that it should be a game changer, because you're likely going to have it in there as malicious.
This isn't a birthing pot situation where some people just have it in like a Phyrexian themed deck. Like, no, food chain is there for crime. Definitely a good pick. Let me get another one here that I think could justify. Let's go with some commanders, different commanders, because like these are the ones that I think you can also make a case for with just the people that we have. First one I had was Jonah the Unifier. There's so many legends, cascading effects, makes a buff. You basically took Sliver Legion and the first Sliver, put them together, and then made it for just legends. The card is bonkers strong, and it's in 5 color.
But I can also see a way that you can make that into a precon without it just fully taking over the game. It's difficult, I will grant you that, but I believe it can be done. Just given the massive legends that are out there.
Theoretically, too, like you can do the same thing with Yuriko. It's just such a good value piece. It's really hard to break it. I've got another one, too. I guess technically a couple.
I would say Yuriko is a little bit more difficult because Commander Ninjutsu was a mistake.
It absolutely was a mistake. And they can fix it, which is the crazy part for me. You can't just go through and just change that up real quick. It's nuts. Another one that I would want to bring into the conversation of being a game changer is Chulane, Teller of Tales. Every creature you cast is going to be drawing a card and a land coming in untapped. Are there more powerful versions of the deck that are using Allure and Shrieking Drake? Absolutely. The worst you could do, I think, with this deck is like an upgraded precon. Because no matter what you're playing, even if it's just out of the commons and uncommons you have laying around, if you get to turn 10 and you've got a full grip and you got 20 cards, 20 lands in the field, you're still doing great. I don't care what your creatures are. You have to like go out of your way to hinder yourself. And on top of that, in a power level 3, you're still in the upgraded precon level where it's not going to immediately make you into a power level 4, but I don't think a lot of regular precons are going to handle that well.
Speaking of a lot of legendary creatures, there are a lot of legendary creatures on the ban list for how strong they could be. And truthfully, my opinion, and Levi and I talked a little bit about this, I feel like all of the legendary creatures could just be moved to the game changer list because a lot of them were moved there because of how strong they were. But if they were moved to the game changer list, the people who want to play with how strong they are can play with them again as long as they're at the 4s and 5s and very tempered 3s.
I think you really would have to soft launch back in. Like something like Leovold with the wheels and immediately taking away everyone's hands. Like we already have Jinkataxius as a 10 mana spell, worrying about that on the game changer list. Putting it with a Sultai covered 3 mana commander is bonkers.
This is why I said you could do it, and now it is within minimum of 3. And if you want to try and deal with that and a 3, that is the prerogative. And that is where the conversation's supposed to be. That's why I say that, at least for me, a lot of the banned commanders can just get shunted right into the game changers. Likely won't affect too much because it's not going to hit those precon games at all. And it's definitely not going to hit Jank.
I guess it depends.
That was a blanket statement for me. That's not even my pick.
Yeah.
Because we know what my pick is, Levi.
Oh, is it Coalition Victory?
Coalition Victory, baby!
You and your Coalition Victory. Coalition Victory, 3 Wooburg, so 8 total mana. You win the game if you control a land of each basic land type and a creature of each color. So people don't like it for the win out of nowhere. I think it's going to be win out of everywhere if it gets unbanned because everyone and their mom is going to be making this deck. As soon as it comes out, I guarantee it. It's 8 mana. We have Expropriate that's around the same mana that basically wins you the game. Like if you're resolving an 8 mana with having one of each color spell, that deserves to be a powerful effect.
Coalition Victory did nothing wrong.
I mean, it did something wrong to somebody. Here we are. I've got a couple cards that are very strong that I would want to talk about on possibly moving into the game changer list. A couple of them that I do not think they're going to do right away, but maybe a few years down the road because I think it's just too soon to bring them back. And I'm not talking about Crypt right now. I'm talking about Dockside and Jeweled Lotus. Crypt is universally good. There's never a bad time to play it. Dockside, it really depends on what you're going against because there are creature only decks. And every once in a while, I'll like look around the board and see like how much mana could a Dockside actually make here? In some games, it's like 3 treasures. So it's a 2 mana you're getting 3 treasures off of. We already have restrictions in place to stop 2-card combos. I think it would be fine, especially if we're keeping it up to the bracket 4 games. And then Jewel Lotus as well. You get 3 mana. It's very strong. It's just for your commander, though. There's a lot of commander decks that just don't want this. Again, this is something you're only really going to see at bracket level 4. I think both those would be totally fine. And I think incentivizing like higher mana value commanders are being played. Like I wouldn't even mind a Jewel Lotus to come out that says you can only put this in your deck if your commander is a mana value 5 or greater. Just to kind of get these bigger commanders getting a chance to play because we're kind of streamlining a bit more in Commander where we're using lower mana value commanders more often just because it's harder to recast something if it gets blown up twice if it already started at 5. So now I've got to pay 9.
Of the two, I'm pretty sure that Jeweled Lotus would be the first one that comes off just because that one is the one that most people had a problem with outside of Crypt.
The only way to play it is like Commander Cube if you made a cube or something. Because it was a commander only card, it is now useless.
There's also the weird combo with doubling cube in Legacy.
Yeah, but it's a very, very mid deck as is. You could technically use it. That's more of I had a playset and they were pretty and I needed an excuse to use them. That's why you're playing that deck.
There is one other card that I think should go onto the Game Changers list from the ban list, and that's Gifts Ungiven.
Gifts Ungiven, definitely an interesting thought. The Fail to Find always makes that a little bit more intriguing. Definitely would be a CDH card. How many 1 and 2 bracket would not want this?
It's the fact that it would still be a powerful card because people could still angle shoot with it. And that's why it would just be a less expensive intuition at that point. The most that people maybe in like 1s and 2s would want this for is if they had specific blue graveyard synergy kind of things.
A zombie type or something.
Even then, there's better cards that are not this game breaking.
And it definitely would attract attention with that one. The one that I bring up as far as the card that I think could get unbanned right away, definitely a controversial card, would be Prophet of Crufix.
That was actually on my short list to get there.
If you have it where it's got a soft ban, It's a 5-mana Seedborn Muse that gives your creature cards flash. So it's not everything, and it untaps all creatures and lands, so it's not going to untap your mana rocks. I think the game has evolved enough to start bringing this back into conversation at like power bracket 3 and up. I wouldn't put this in a pre-con. I wouldn't put this at the bracket 1s, but I think that we could start having conversation to bringing this back.
In the same conversation, that's why I also was like, you know what we should do? Put Tolarian Academy on the game changer list. Just go for it.
Don't do that.
Yes, do it. Go for it.
All the clues running around and food token. Don't do that. I own a Gaia's Cradle. If you banned Gaia's Cradle today, I wouldn't bat an eye. I'd be like, that makes sense. Same with Sarah Sanctum. I think those are just two strong individual lands, no downside. Like, get them gone.
Give us the Tolarian Academy. You have a way to limit it now.
Evan, you know better. Don't do it.
So now it's the what shouldn't go on that we've heard that people say should go on. The one card that came up the most often was Island. The strongest card in all of Magic.
It's a beautiful card. Absolutely love it. But no, all serious, doesn't he go on? I've seen some people clamor for Seedborn Muse to go on.
I'm in agreement that shouldn't go on.
It's a strong card, but it's not a game changer. Like, you have to build your deck around an activated ability or some instant speed to really make use of it.
And even in CDH, it's fallen out of favor too.
It's just not as strong as I think we need to be an absolute game changer on these lists, because there's some cards that obviously we could consider putting on there. And some other ones like Legendary Narset, the Enlightened Master, I heard floating around a little bit. It's a good card, but everything that it's doing as far as combos or chaining extra turns is already on the list and its other parameters. So there's certain cards that they do things that are very, very brutal. We've already got it covered somewhere. Yeah. Don't chain extra turns. Got it. Expropriate is kind of a weird one because it does the extra turns plus stealing stuff at the same time. That's why it's on there versus like Time Stretch isn't. We've had some weird stuff, but just remember that if it's covered by one of the restriction topics, you don't need to put it on the list.
The same thing with the one that I thought top of the list for me shouldn't go on, that somebody said, Teferi's Protection.
I understand you can do malicious things with Teferi's Protection, like Teferi's Protection Armageddon or something, just to blow up everyone's lands while you're phased out. A lot of the aggressive ways of using Teferi's Protection, you're not going to be able to do at the lower power, and it's a defensive spell. It's used to kind of combat against board wipes or Cyclonic Rift, like having an answer for it. That was the original card design intention.
And there is one particular combo that you can do with Teferi's Protection, which is already covered by the 3 bracket, where you pretty much activate the ability to skip your next turn, and you just do that like 10,000 times than Teferi's Protection.
I really want someone to do that when I have an Elixir or Immortality in my deck or something, and just keep shuffling back in, and they come back and I'm at like 5 million life. Yeah, that'd be hilarious.
That's the combo that Teferi's Protection can do. And again, that's likely going to be a late game combo. That's not going to be I'm going to win on the spot right now.
It's a very valid point, but, and then again, it's covered with the 2-card combo. What has your experience been so far with your deck? Give me an example of a deck that maybe you like powered up or down or anything. How have you experienced this bracket system so far?
My Geared, which is in fact supposed to do combos and tries to do it a little bit earlier, certainly got put into a 2. So for at least Moxfield, I'm uncertain of how they're quantifying the combos for 3, but that might need to be a little bit more refined, because Kiki Jiki Zealous Conscript was absolutely in there. Jolly Balloon Man, the whole 9 yards. So what I did was I took a look and tried to get Geared to be a 4 in Moxfield's eye. So it took a little bit reworking, but it didn't take too much reworking. And it certainly got there. I just had to put a little bit more tutors in than I normally would. Really consistently put in my combo pieces. As far as that, most of the decks just kind of stuck to where I thought they would be. Except for, and you're going to laugh at this, Polygamy Mark III. Polygamy Mark III was a 4.
That's great. Was it too many game changers?
Probably too many game changers, because that deck is super reliant on tutors.
Of the decks that I had, my Sisay Stacks deck, which is a Selesnya deck, it technically runs what I would consider Mass Land Denial. I can do Elish Norn things and turn creatures into lands into creatures and things like that. So definitely a 4. So I went ahead and tweaked it a little bit to be able to handle the 4 environment a bit more than it has been, just because it's normally trying to win a later game and things like that. But I tweaked it up a little bit from the 3 area that it was presumed. Then I had a dragon deck that I moved up to a 3 because it technically didn't really run that many tutors or winning or anything, but just dragons inherently are strong enough that I would put it in a 3. I think if it went against a table of precons, it would do significantly well. So I went ahead and bumped it up. And I had a couple decks that were on the cusp of being 2s or 3s, but maybe they just had a 1 too many game changer. So I just swapped out a couple of cards just to bring them back down. An example was I have Assistant Weatherlight Captain human type of deck that I wanted to be more in the realm of 3. So I took out 1 Ancient Tomb to bring it down a little bit. And then we'll keep adjusting as is. And I took out a Ristic Study for a mass appeal, which is draw a card for each human you control. Just get all the cards at once. And, little things like that. So I haven't had anything like drastically had to do. And as I start playing more with people's expectations of where 3s and 4s are at, I'm sure I'll learn and adjust on the fly a bit more. Just because we're still in this realm of like trying to figure out what general population sees as a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5.
And honestly, this is kind of where we want to be at. And it's at least what the Commander format panel wanted to do, which is codify what is a strong card and what makes a deck strong outside of it. It took pretty much their very initial putting a number to card system and just made that the game changers list. And then codified more of what makes a deck in this category, what makes a deck in this category. Really cooked with it. It's just opening up the conversation of, hey, I'm trying to build in this specific category, but it doesn't seem like it's fitting one or the other. Whether that be going, I built this to be a 2 and it's playing like a 4, or I try to build this like a 4 and it's playing like a 1.
Yeah, that's going to be the weird thing moving forward. Whenever you have a strategy that, in Jacobi's case, you have the mass land destruction. It's a upgraded precon or a precon level deck, but strategy in and of itself is auto going into 4. So you have to decide if you want to rule 0 that, or if you want to just take it and just try to get it ramped up to deal with that situation. So it'll be very interesting to see how Jacobi ends up tweaking that deck in the future here. But all in all, I think this was an excellent start for this new power assessment. We obviously saw with the Am I the Archenemy that we have some validity to needing this, because he had a deck at what I believe was a lower power table, and we see on bracket why that was a problem. So I think that this is going to prevent that from happening in the future. And I think that's fewer games and feel bad situations like we have like that, the better.
And it's really codifying intent. That's the intent to play at a certain level.
Well, I have the intent to call this show a wrap. We've been talking for plenty amount of time here. Do you have any final comments before we go?
Unban all of the legends, you cowards.
Don't do that. But this has been the Thought Vessel Show, helping out the channel. I know we have a lot of new viewers. Give us a like, give us a subscription, share it around to your friends, see someone who might want to join in the conversation. This has been Thought Vessel. Have a wonderful day.
Coalition victory, baby! Bye.
Bye-bye.